As the old saying goes, never trust a movie death. If you can't explicitly see that a character has been killed, there's always a chance that they actually haven't and will turn up alive and well at some point down the line. However, even sometimes witnessing a death firsthand isn't even enough to make sure a character has permanently perished. So essentially, until a franchise is over and done with, don't write anything off. Of course, some character resurrections are better than others, but first, a disclaimer. The examples I'm talking about today include times where we were led to believe a character was dead, even if they officially weren't. As long as they had you believing that a character was dead, then their resurrection absolutely counts. So with that in mind, you're watching What Culture, and here are the best and worst times a character returned from the dead. Mia Wallace, Pulp Fiction. After overdosing while being chaperoned by one of her boss's henchmen, Vincent Vega, Mia Wallace is driven to the house of an unlikely savior, that being a sleazy drug dealer and his girlfriend. Crashing into their place, Vincent desperately tries to get help, only for Mia's salvation to lie in a needle full of adrenaline that has to then be stabbed straight into her heart. The scene itself is pitch perfect, as I'm sure you likely know. Nobody in the scene knows if it's going to work, if anyone can even do it, if they'll do it right. It's all proper white-knuckle stuff. But of course, eventually it does work, and Mia bolts upright. Now, of course, this one does come with a little caveat, as Mia is never technically pronounced dead, but this scene is definitely played as a revival, and if anything went wrong with the injection or if it wasn't available, then Mia definitely would have died within seconds.
Drake Ramoray, Friends. Legendary neurosurgeon Drake Ramoray was taken from us too soon. In a tragically ironic twist of fate, the only doctor who could save the medical genius from his appalling injuries was himself. Anybody who has ever witnessed an episode of Friends will know that we're referring to the ridiculous return of one of Days of Our Lives' most famous alums. Ramoray originally departed the land of the living after Joey claimed credit for the character's lines, so the irritated writers proceeded to throw him down an elevator shaft to teach him some humility. Armed with a new brain, Ramoray stages a triumphant comeback following a cerebral transplant, with his new brain belonging to departed cast member Jessica Lockhart's character. The 7th season of Friends sees Joey having to learn the actress's mannerisms in order to authentically bring this bizarre amalgamation of characters to life, with predictably hilarious results. Joey's role as Drake was one of Friends' longest running and most beloved gags. Accordingly, the reintroduction to the deceased Doctor is one of the more chuckle-worthy moments of the show's latter seasons.
Jason Voorhees in Friday the 13th Part 6, Jason Lives. This one might be slightly controversial, but the way in which Friday the 13th's hockey mask-wearing antagonist is revived from the dead is kinda rubbish. In the 4th movie, erroneously labelled The Final Chapter, Jason Voorhees is hacked to pieces by Tommy Jarvis. They think he comes back in the 5th movie, but is actually an imposter. Thus, at the start of Jason Lives, Jason is dead. However, as you can probably tell by the subtitle, that's not the case for long. Driven mad by the idea that Jason could still be alive, Tommy visits his gravesite to destroy the body once and for all. In doing so, Jarvis rams a metal spike through the corpse just as a lightning bolt strikes it. This burst of energy is enough to bring the killer back to life Frankenstein style, setting in motion a brand new killing spree. Whilst it's nicely ironic that Tommy's fear of Jason being reborn is what actually brings him back, the way in which it happens is really silly. The lightning strike in the pole at the exact time it enters Jason's body is a bit too cartoonish and turns what could have been a really serious moment into a bit of a joke.
Mia, Evil Dead 2013. After being possessed by a demonic deadite, Mia torments her friends and brother in this excellent remake, mutilating herself, boiling herself in the shower, and splitting her tongue in two with a Stanley knife. Essentially, she suffers wounds that it would be tough to come back from, but she's definitively killed by her brother later on, who learns that the only way to save her soul is to bury her alive. Not content to just lose her though, in this moment, he devises a plan. After placing a plastic bag over her head and burying her in the ground until the ritual is complete and both the demon and Mia are dead, he then digs her back up and, like her namesake, jams 2 needles attached to an electric box into her heart to give her an impromptu defibrillator shock. Now, what makes this one so great isn't just the process itself and the fact that it miraculously works, but that after this, Mia becomes the final girl of the movie, and an amazing one at that.
Tulip O'Hare, Preacher. Ruth Negga's effortlessly charismatic take on legendary comic character Tulip O'Hare was one of Preacher's most prized assets. It was therefore unsurprising that Preacher chose to resurrect O'Hare soon after her death at the hands of undercover Grail operative Featherstone. The shocking loss of Tulip represented a jaw-dropping cliffhanger, but the indispensable nature of Negga's character and the boundless limits of Preacher's supernatural universe meant that fans were quietly confident of her revival. After a brief but nightmarish stint in purgatory, Jesse eventually manages to restore Tulip to life with the help of a witch, who just so happens to be his magnetically chilling grandma. Tulip's return to the land of the living may not have come as a shock to fans of the original comic, but it remained a thunderous way to kick off the third outing for AMC's outrageous show. O'Hare's demise in the second season finale also had the benefit of providing a key flashpoint in Jesse and Cassidy's feud. Jesse's refusal to let Cassidy turn Tulip into a vampire to save her life appeared to spell the end for any semblance of a relationship between two of the show's focal characters.
Phil Connor's Groundhog Day. If anyone can make brutally killing themselves over and over again in a supernatural purgatory funny, it's Bill Murray. The actor's performance as grouchy weatherman Phil Connors in Groundhog Day is one of his all-time best. Trapped in a never-ending loop of Sonny and Cher, Connors must become a better person if he is to escape purgatory and return to his normal life. And when the idea of changing his wicked ways becomes too much for Phil, he decides that life just isn't worth living anymore. So he kidnaps the groundhog that he believes is responsible for his torment and drives off a cliff, killing himself and the rodent. Or so he thinks. See, the next day, well, the same day actually, I guess, he then wakes up right back where he started. This leads to Phil ending his torment again and again in a number of different ways, including electrocution, being hit by a truck, and jumping off a roof. It sounds incredibly dark on paper, doesn't it? But Phil's repeated deaths, plus the fact that you know he's going to come back to life, make those scenes kind of a hoot to watch.
Jim Hopper, Stranger Things. Leading up to the release of Volume 4, Stranger Things' worst kept secret was the fate of Jim Hopper. David Harbour's beloved chief of police was seemingly blown to Kingdom Come in Volume 3's finale, sacrificing himself in a cataclysmic explosion to close the Russians' portal to the Upside Down. However, the Duffer brothers were hardly tight-lipped regarding Hopper's apparent demise. A post-credit scene made reference to an American being held prisoner in a Russian facility. Wonder who that could possibly be. Fans swiftly began speculating how Hopper could have possibly survived the blast, let alone how he ended up in Russia. The explanation was maddeningly simple. The classic get-out-of-jail-free narrative device of, he jumped away at the last second. Hopper was simply blasted clear of the explosion by the shockwave and was found by Russian soldiers sifting through the debris. Do better, Duffer brothers. The strength of Hopper's return derives entirely from David Harbour's performance, as opposed to the intricacies concerning his survival. One of the most popular television characters of all time, Hopper's purported loss highlighted the extent of the devastating narrative hole his character's death would leave.
Chucky in Child's Play 2. At the end of the first Child's Play movie, the evil doll Chucky is exceedingly dead. Like there's dead, and then there's Chucky dead. He gets burnt to a crisp, blown to pieces, and then shot through the heart. That should be enough to keep him away for good, right? Wrong. At the start of Child's Play 2, the Play Pals Corporation, the company who produced the Good Guy dolls, are attempting to recover from the bad publicity of their product's killing spree. To prove there is nothing wrong with the doll, they reconstruct the one that had attempted to kill Andy and his mother during the first movie. However, wouldn't you know it, yet another electrical surge hits the factory and brings the killer doll back to life. What are the odds? It's supposed to be a comment on the greed of large corporations, but honestly, how stupid does one have to be to rebuild a toy infused with the soul of a serial killer? And the great irony being that this stupid decision was undertaken by a large corporation in order to make money off a Chucky sequel.
Imhotep, the Mummy. Ancient Egyptian high priest Imhotep, the bad guy in 1999's The Mummy, is definitely dead at the start of the film, right? Like, he gets buried in a sarcophagus with a bunch of flesh-eating beetles and is reduced to a rotting corpse before he awakens. So that definitely counts as dead, yeah? Anyway, the point is he only stays dead for, let me check my watch, a couple thousand years until Evie Canahan revives the deceased priest after reading an extract from the Book of the Dead. Having been sentenced to death for having an affair with the mistress of the pharaoh, Rukiera, the big bad returns to the land of the living and sets about trying to revive his beloved. What's so good about this resurrection though is the actual process. Imhotep is an intimidating character, but him getting his skin, muscles, and organs back by sucking the life out of other people is a genuinely brutal twist in what's ultimately a family-friendly movie.
Elizabeth Keen, The Blacklist. Long-running thriller The Blacklist is one of television's most compelling crime dramas. The magnetic James Spader crackles in the lead role of Raymond Red Reddington, a criminal mastermind who volunteers his services to the FBI in catching the elusive members of the titular Blacklist. Reddington's only request is immunity from prosecution, and working with a supposedly unconnected profiler named Elizabeth Keen, later revealed to be his daughter. Keen, played in a masterful turn by Megan Boone, seemingly perishes due to complications arising from childbirth in the show's third season. Fortunately for the hordes of grieving fans, what seemed like a tragically premature end was unveiled as the Blacklist's latest case study in deception. The third season finale reveals that Elizabeth faked her death by placing herself in a medically induced coma with the help of Kate Kaplan, taking a leaf out of Reddington's book in a desperate attempt to avoid the tendrils of his influence. This twist had ramifications for the Blacklist that are still being felt to this day. Keen was eventually killed in the 8th season finale, just as she seemed primed to take over Reddington's empire. However, due to her previous rise from the dead, fans justifiably remain skeptical that this beloved show staple is truly gone.
Eric Draven, The Crow. Starring the late Brandon Lee as Eric Draven, The Crow is a 1994 action movie about a musician brought back from the dead to avenge his and his girlfriend's murders. And unlike some on this list, this isn't a movie that makes you wait for the resurrection either, as The Crow starts with Draven's character killed at the hands of a violent gang and being reborn as a supernaturally powered vigilante out for revenge. And with a premise like that, well, how can you make anything less than cinematic gold? Of course, it must be stated that you can't talk about The Crow without also talking about the on-set tragedy, which saw actor Brandon Lee suffering a genuine bullet wound to the stomach. This horrific accident led to Lee's untimely death at the age of just 28. While Lee's death, of course, dominated the conversation about the film, though, it's also important to remember that he was a brilliant actor, and The Crow is an awesome movie in and of itself, anchored by this great performance of one of cinema's most memorable characters.
Arthur Shelby, Peaky Blinders. Peaky Blinders' 4th season was the show's darkest outing to date. Audiences got a terrifying taste of what they were in for, as series mainstay John Shelby was ruthlessly gunned down by mafioso hitmen outside of his own home. The message that Stephen Knight and co were clearly trying to send? Nobody is safe. This morbid status quo appeared to have claimed its latest victim in the season finale, as eldest Shelby brother Arthur apparently met a gruesome end at the hands and piano wire of Luca Changreta's assassins. Tommy immediately surrenders to protect the remainder of his family, or so it appears. In a magnificent twist, Tommy reveals he has allied himself with Changreta's business rivals across the pond. Those men now work for him. Tommy delivers a brutal beatdown to the Italian, leaving audiences practically pounding their fists with glee. This is all before the image of Arthur even comes into focus, his purported death unmasked as a stunning illusion to lure Changreta to the table. Luca barely has time to blink before Arthur executes him with a single shot to the head, avenging John in one of Peaky Blinders' most immortal sequences.
Ellen Ripley in Alien Resurrection. Another entry, another film called Resurrection, another trilogy tarnished by a needlessly tacked on 4th film. Set 2 centuries after Alien 3, or Alien Cubed if you're going by how it's written, Alien Resurrection opens with the creation of a clone of heroine Ellen Ripley. Why did they need to create a clone? Well, because the original Ripley burned herself alive in the previous film to kill a xenomorph queen that was gestating inside of her. Yep, that'll do it. This was a fitting end to Ripley's story, dying alongside the creature that had come to define her. It was also meant to signal the end of the franchise, which had already fallen pretty far from the lofty standards of the original. But like all the characters on this list, franchises in Hollywood don't stay dead for long. Whilst it's not the original Ripley that comes back in Resurrection, it is a character who shares her DNA and is played by the same actress, so it counts. It's just a shame that Sigourney Weaver's return didn't signal a resurrection for the series, as this film got very middling reviews.
Gandalf, The Lord of the Rings, The Two Towers. We just had to have Gandalf on here somewhere, even if I just know in my gut that there'll be some kind of Tolkien technicality, I should definitely trademark that, that'll have people debating the legitimacy of this inclusion in the comments. But for fans of the Lord of the Rings movies, it's pretty clear that we're led to believe that Gandalf is dead and gone, following his iconic fight with the Balrog in the Fellowship of the Ring. The monstrous creature snags the wizard with his whip, dragging him down into the abyss below in an extremely emotional scene, and the first sign that the mission to Mordor is not going to be all fun and games. However, because Frodo needed his wizard, the sorcerer rose from the dead to become Gandalf the White in the Two Towers. Now, in the Lord of the Rings books, it is explained that Gandalf was returned by the creator Eru as a replacement for the traitorous Saruman. This is kind of glossed over in the films though, because if Peter Jackson included every piece of Tolkien lore in his movies, well, he'd probably still be making them today.
Kara Thrace, Battlestar Galactica. Katie Sackhoff's Kara Thrace was one of Battlestar Galactica's most celebrated characters. The fighter ace purportedly perishes in devastating circumstances when a Viper mysteriously explodes, following a dogfight with Cyclone battleships in the midst of a solar storm. However, Starbuck isn't done with audiences just yet. The beloved pilot reappears to Apollo in an unblemished ship, totally unaware of her demise. Thrace claims to have been to Earth and eventually guides the fleet there, despite their initial reservations concerning her impossible reappearance. Adding a further layer of mystique to proceedings, Starbuck disappears soon after accomplishing her mission, begging the question as to whether this is a legitimate resurrection or a message from the beyond. Battlestar Galactica always handled its religious elements with flawless aplomb, and Thrace's brief revival stands as one of the show's most celebrated examples of this.
Ramirez in Highlander II: The Quickening. Sean Connery made his first appearance as Juan Sanchez Villalobos Ramirez, the least convincing Egyptian of all time, in the 1986 sci-fi great Highlander. Ramirez acts as a mentor to main character Connor MacLeod, filling him in on the backstory of his immortality and training him in combat. Unfortunately for Connor, his buddy meets an unfortunate end at the hands of Kurgan, another immortal who chops off poor Sean's head. That's how immortals are killed in this universe, which makes them not actually immortal when you think about it. Connor eventually avenges his friend's death by slaying Kurgan, and that's the last we ever see of him. That is, until the studio wanted a sequel so desperately that they mucked around with the continuity. In Highlander 2, Ramirez is just alive for some reason, and he's now an alien wizard. What? After the studio took control, they changed almost everything about the series' lore. The Immortals were now a race of aliens with an entirely different backstory to the one established in the first film. As you can imagine, the sequel flopped hard, and is widely regarded as one of the worst movies ever made. Poor Sean, that was not worth coming back to life for.
George, It's a Wonderful Life. It's a Wonderful Life is one of the best films of all time, and that's mostly down to just how much it makes you love hero George. George is one of cinema's nicest characters, someone who puts everyone ahead of himself, to the point where he finds himself losing out on all of his dreams, working a stressful job that brings him no success, and ultimately brings him to a point where he believes that he's worth more dead than alive. It's at this point where he's visited by an angel called Clarence, who gives him a glimpse of the world without him in it. Now, what makes this resurrection incredible is just how hard George fights to return to his previous life. After being shown just how much good he brought into the world, the moment where he's brought back into existence is just euphoric. Euphoric enough to have him running through the crummy town, grateful for every part of it.
Brian Griffin, Family Guy. The levels of vitriol from Family Guy's detractors are only matched by the passionate levels of defense from the legendary cartoon's diehard fanbase. However, even the show's most stone-faced critics couldn't help but allow a little ray of emotion to penetrate their icy exteriors when the Griffin's dog Brian passed away in a devastating fashion after being hit by a car. The scene in which the teary family bid their loyal hound farewell is one of the more moving sequences in adult cartoon history. The impact of Brian's loss, sharply juxtaposed with Family Guy's usual crude humor, results in one of the most emotionally charged scenes in recent memory. Seth MacFarlane did a phenomenal job in maintaining the ruse for so long, giving interviews concerning the impact of Brian's demise, and even casting Tony Sirico as the Griffin's new dog, Vinny. The show legitimately appeared to be moving on without Brian, a stunning development considering the character's storied history and popularity. Ultimately, the sense of authenticity surrounding Brian's loss proved to be a stroke of genius, serving only to ramp up the feel-good factor when he made his triumphant homecoming. With Vinny's help, Stewie used his restored time machine to save his best friend, precipitating the uplifting comeback of America's favourite alcoholic canine.
Spock in Star Trek III: The Search for Spock. Star Trek II: The Wrath of Khan contains one of the most emotionally charged death scenes across all of sci-fi cinema. After entering a room full of radiation to reactivate the warp drive, Spock dies whilst Kirk watches on helplessly through some glass. The Vulcan's sacrifice saves his crew and he is honoured with a grand funeral, his coffin fired into the great expanse of space. Behind the scenes, Spock actor Leonard Nimoy wasn't originally going to be in The Wrath of Khan, but was enticed into the role with the promise of a glorious send-off for his character. Whilst he originally got his wish, this was immediately reneged on in the next movie. In Star Trek III: The Search for Spock, the Enterprise gang discover that their power was actually brought back to life by a terraforming machine used by Khan in their previous outing. They eventually track him down and all is right with the world. Except it's not, because this completely undoes his fantastic death scene. Not to mention, it goes against Nimoy's original wish. Well, at least he got to direct this film. That was probably their apology.
Everyone, Avengers Endgame. After the devastating effects of the snap that wiped out half of all life in the universe, the remaining Avengers go on a big and slightly confusing mission to prevent the disaster and restore their fallen comrades. Through a whole bunch of time travel shenanigans, the heroes are eventually successful in their aims, and they find this out in the most epic way possible. Staring down Thanos' army with all hope seemingly lost, Captain America then gets a faint message on his communicator. It's Sam Wilson, who had previously been taken by the snap, who utters the now immortal words, "On your left." With that, a series of portals open up behind Cap, and out walks just about every actor who has ever been in an MCU movie, which roughly equates to the population of, I don't know, Switzerland or something. In spite of everything, and after 5 dreadful years, the good guys eventually win. And almost everyone is saved.
Sherlock. The BBC Sherlock is a brilliantly frustrating case study in on-screen resurrection. While the detective's death only lasts for a matter of minutes, with Sherlock's survival being revealed in the final shots of the Reichenbach Fall, the 2 years between the second and third seasons were rife with desperately far-fetched theories as to how he denied the Reaper. Framed as a fraud by Moriarty, Sherlock was posed with an impossible choice in the second season finale. The detective must hurl himself from the roof of St. Bartholomew's Hospital, or his tormentor will have every person that Sherlock holds dear murdered, with assassins standing by. Sherlock's emotionally loaded farewell to John seconds before his jump lent an air of mournful authenticity to proceedings. As paramedics scraped Holmes's bloody remains off the pavement, viewers were left with one question: how the hell does one survive a multi-story swan dive onto concrete? Ultimately, Sherlock is maddeningly vague concerning the answer that fans were dying to find out. The following episode depicts a number of increasingly fantastical theories, later shown to be the musings of a guilt-stricken Philip Anderson following Sherlock's perceived suicide. While Sherlock eventually confides what he claims to be the unbelievable truth behind his survival to Anderson himself, the tongue-in-cheek manner of his revelation means that audiences are ultimately left questioning the legitimacy of his explanation.
Emperor Palpatine in Star Wars: The Rise of Skywalker. Yes, it's not explicitly stated that Palpatine actually died during Return of the Jedi. We never see the body, we never get an actual confirmation that he's gone. He might have died, he might not have. So is it fair to put him on this list? Yes, because regardless of what actually happened to Palpatine, the way they reintroduced him to the Skywalker saga was so stupid. After he turns up near the start of the film, many years after his supposed death at the hands of Darth Vader, fans were craving an answer as to how he survived or was resurrected. Did we ever get that answer? Hell no! The closest we got to one was Poe saying, "Somehow Palpatine has returned." Somehow. That's all we get after all these years. Somehow. This line is the icing on the idiot cake that is Rise of Skywalker. Maybe if they'd made even the slightest bit of effort to explain why the Emperor was still around, then we could have forgiven it. But they didn't. And that's why it doesn't matter if Palpatine actually died or not, because this is one of the dumbest things in movie history.